Back to LA show. Thank you guys so much for tuning back in with me. Today we have Cisco. We have him back again. Thank you so much for tuning back in with us. Cisco, how have you been?
I've been great, LA, and I just appreciate you having me back.
Not a problem, of course. Um, I know that we call you in with when certain things are a little tricky. And I don't think, our audience really caught on to that because you do have a great wealth of knowledge that you bring to the table, and I appreciate it.
Well, I thank you, and I appreciate that you appreciate my knowledge. I always tell people I'm just nothing special. It's just a dude that read a lot of books over the years and developed a technique of trying to break things down and understand them. And I'm gonna tell you straight up that I don't always get the answers right, but the simple fact that I really have the thirst of the truth and not necessarily to be right, I don't mind being wrong. So, you know, I just hope you guys are patient with what I'm gonna present today.
Yeah, well, today what we're presenting is kind of like a follow-up to the previous video that we have put out. And we're going to do a little mini series on different topics that are going on in the world that we're seeing play out before our eyes. The first topic that we have is a critical analysis of the protests that have been going on all around the world. Um, we have some points that we're going to make. So, please stick around to the end of this series that we're going to present to you all because there's a lot of information that's going to flow. So, Cisco, who are the players involved in these protests?
Well, I know that the vast majority of us in we get a lot of our information from different social media platforms. Some of us might watch the news. But the general feeling is that I is that the people on the grounds are looking at the protests from the surface while really understanding that there's way bigger players pulling the strings behind these protests. And one thing that I want you guys to think about is just like this. We started out with George Floyd, okay? And just take a brief look at the what's happening at the protests. It's not George Floyd anymore, and that just shows that they have on the grounds of the very protest there are people in place that have literally directed the attention from police brutality as it relates to George Floyd to other issues, depending on which protest that you're looking at. The short answer is the globalists are the players. Whom specifically, as it relates to Black Lives Matter, we've made it clear who's behind that. That's George Soros and a few other entities, and it's big money behind it. And that's why you see the heavy um, bombardment of Black Lives Matter chanting signs. They're painting it on the streets. That shows you the influential or ideological baseline of these protests. However, you have some other players involved, like Antifa. And Antifa has a lot of the same globalists. In fact, you can look this up, where the United Nations had to take back their pro Antifa tweet after they got a backlash of posting it. That shows you that there is at least ideological and may even be financial support for Antifa on the grounds, which is a very pro socialist, fascist type, anarchist type group. And in the beginning of in the Minnesota, who you were seeing Antifa type dressed, You also saw another entity as a provocateur. Are these military police-like tall-framed men that end up in almost all protests within the first initial hours of a protest. You can see those same guys in Ferguson. You can see those guys where any major protests were. You're gonna find these guys that have like attire that you would that you would normally associate with military or police type shoes. They have that cut, and lo and behold, in this initial Minnesota protest, you saw them there. So these are some. So you gotta have also. We know that some of the other players is intelligence gathering. So different entities of police agencies and or military uh, agencies are doing surveillance. So they're there even though you're not seeing them, but if you look at certain pictures or certain videos, you may be able to spot them. So that's kind of like the players, let's say Antifa. Also, you have Boogaloo. You also have Proud Boys. You also have Black Bloc, which is also backed by the Trilateral Commission. So a lot of players in these protests. It's not just everyday people. We've heard this every single time. These local business owners come back and say, hey, these people aren't from our town. And we also heard about it in Ferguson, how they were getting paid. We've seen it in the initial protests here that of people being paid. People, open up your eyes. This is not organic. This is not organic, and this is not our people. And when I say our people, I'm talking about anybody who considers them a normal American citizen, whatever race you may be. If you think of yourself as a normal person, would have normal reactions to normal crisis that we as Americans have experienced, and I'm gonna tell you that these protests ain't us.
Okay. Okay. Well, that was a good response to that question because it does go in deep. If you want to go in deeper on Antifa, Boogaloo, or Proud Boys, I did do a post on my Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter page specifically breaking down what they are, what their ideologies are, what they're characterized to look like at these protests, and it's a breakdown of who these people are. Also, you brought up the different ideologies coming from these protests, which are, some people are chanting out defund the police or tear down the Confederate statues.
Right?
Um, it's just a lot of different rhetoric coming from these protests. But
And now you've actually created a new protest out of these protests, which is the anti-protesters that are protesting. Look at that mind fuck.
correct, correct. There's a lot of people that are out in the streets right now, and we are still in the midst of a pandemic, but the media is doing their job to, continue to fuel certain things. Why are certain cities hubs or points of interest for the protest agenda?
Well, LA, as we very descriptively describe the layout as it relates to the Nipsey Hussle assassination, how that city and that area and that state is a democratically run state. And if you understand the ideological pathway that the Democratic Party is particularly taking, it is based on enforcing austerity and gentrification, which is in order for those processes to come about, you're going to need uh, more crime, but at the same time, you have to be hard on crime in order to drive out those people in fear of the crime. You're gonna redevelop the area in some cases. In other cases, they're gonna drive up the prices. people that have owned their homes 30, 40 years. They're going to sell their homes, and it's going to create. So first you get the austerity, and boom, you hit them with the gentrification. Why are the protests? Because the socioeconomic conditions of those places, which are predominantly democratic, okay. And I'm gonna say it now because I know some short bus excuse me, there's gonna be some short bus people listening to this. I'm not a Republican. I have no dog in that race. Okay. I'm just calling it like I see it. Those are, you see, the hubs or the hot spots of the protests are democratically run cities, Democratic governors, Democratic senators, Democratic judges, Democratic chief of polices, Democratic mayors, Democratic city council dominated. That's what you have in almost all those cities. Do your own research and just make me out to be wrong. It's all good. But that's what it is. Because even before this happened, LA will tell you a story will come up and it'll be a weird story to me based on my experience in research. And then I'll be like, LA, I'm gonna check and see if that's a democratically run city. And it always almost is. Tell me I'm
It,
wrong, LA.
it is. It normally is. Never have I seen any city that goes up and says Republican whenever we have those weird, tricky stories. Um, and I understand what you're talking about with, I don't have a dog in the race either because I don't see bipartisanship. I just think it's a great divider to us as a nation, as a world. And politically, I have never been that involved or as involved as I am now because of where we're at. But looking at this stuff, it's just a great divider to our world.
Oh,
And it just sucks that it has to be like this, but people are going to keep playing and milking these games that they're playing up top, and we're the ones who are affected. So keep that in mind. Well, Cisco, why does Cisco think that protests ultimately don't work and why you shouldn't protest?
the first part is because historically what happens is you'll have a crisis and there's a cry out that happens after that crisis. And along the way of this cry out, somehow, if in fact some issue gets raised, it gets compromised and watered down to something that means that we're still dealing with the same bullshit that we were dealing with before this crisis even happened. And so I've seen content creators get on other content creators about their opinions about this protest. And I'm gonna tell you that historically and statistically, if you see what the crisis was, what was asked for and what was given, it never adds up. And just to give it a real quick example, wasn't it New York that outlawed the chokehold? Only to be blasted within, I want to say, a week, only to be blasted all over the media that somebody else was put in the chokehold. You see what I mean? So, and now if you talk about why protests don't work, because listen to the narrative on the protests. They got all kinds of agendas going on, all kinds of stuff going on outside of police brutality. Police brutality has been reduced to defund the police. And if you defund the police, that means that you're going to have more crime. And because there's more crime, that the police have to respond, they have to get control. So you're going to have potentially more police brutality. So the defund police thing is idiotic. It's stupid. And it has nothing to do with the initial issue. And then you have all these other stuff. People don't start talking about reparations. People don't talk about separation. People don't talk about all kinds of different things to where it's lost now. It's totally lost. Yeah,
I,
I
to-
mean,
I totally understand. Like you said about defunding the police, that is something that is going to elevate the way that they respond to us, to me, even more. But I can understand the community thinking that that little bit of money that they're pulling or showing you that they're pulling out of these departments is really good. When in fact, we already talked about this before air, the police are set up to where they're a corporation. They get
right,
more, they get more money than Amazon, Walmart. They get a lot of freaking money. And you already explained that to me, but just seeing the money that they're pulling from police departments now, like in California, I think the LAPD and also the NYPD have had substantial amounts of money taken from them.
oh yeah, but
Um,
in theory, I'm think they're gonna play it off like it's really hurting them, and it may hurt them in some way. But you and I know because we done looked, put them under the microscope, them and the LA County Sheriff and the fire department, LA County Fire Department, they making money. And if
yeah,
y'all don't believe it, y'all don't have to believe it. They making money.
yep,
Forget how much funding they give. They making the money, but I'm talking about, let's say, those cities that aren't like LA, New York, that have these big super budgets and these big super police stations and entities. If they did that to some of these other states, these other cities, they man, you're talking about it might it could literally get to shoot on sight.
you're right. You're right.
Just
I mean,
because they can't, just because they got their budget cut, they don't have backup. So it's you and him and his cam if he got it on.
right.
So
I
I
mean,
ain't got backup. I ain't taking no chance. Clap, clap.
it's a double-edged sword for real when you get into stuff like that. As far as the like statues, the Confederate statues, and the signs and symbols of racism, that's something that's been here for years. Them taking it away does not stop the perpetual racism that we're seeing. Um, if anything, it riles these people up. But
Absolutely.
know, I understand where the communities are coming from. However, we got to look at the bigger picture. These are just trophies that are being taken away from our opposition. What are we gaining from that? Our children won't be able to recognize the symbols of racism as they grow up. All that stuff that was in those history books now has to be rewritten, you know?
Right.
So that means my children doesn't learn the way I learned to recognize these symbols. But you know, the way I was introduced in school to slavery and history itself was very traumatic. I'll never forget that. The whole class divided between black and white students after watching this horrific video. I mean, people getting sprayed with water hoses, lynchings was in the video. And I'm in elementary school. So a lot of that kind of turned me off to history. But now, speaking with Cisco and learning things that have been turning points, some things are better left undone. But I digress. Um, So we have seen that there have been different types of protests going on in America.
Right.
But what do you think about Chaz or the CHOP zone, the autonomous zone and the so-called leader, Raz Simone.
Well, as the homie said to me when I asked him about it, because he's he's there in Seattle, and he said it was a real shit show. And now that I've taken a look at it, that's exactly what it is. Um, First of all, and again, it's one of these democratically run places. But the one thing was the autonomous zone. This was first of all, I was shocked at how they even pulled it off. That was the first thing. How can this even happen?
I mean,
It's
these
supposed
people
to not.
had a lot of resources. They had barricades, concrete barricades.
Right,
They had
right, right.
copies.
That's what
They
I'm saying.
had,
You had
they
the
had.
blessing from the mayor.
Yep.
You had the blessing from the mayor. Initially,
Well,
you
now
know.
we that Chaz has been taken down. They tried to march to the mayor's home. However, the mayor actually ended up calling the police on them. So they have
Well,
all kind of sectioned off into different groups trying to do different types of protests throughout the city of Seattle or the
well,
town.
this whole operation, just because of how it was set up and the role that it took, um, it was more a psychological. It might have been even a psychological experiment. I mean, and just to give you a movie reference, well, let me save that. Let me save that. But one of the hypocrisy is, and that's why they had to change the name. And to change the name also comes with some ideology. I'll get into that. So autonomous means that you can't be autonomous and then be asking for things. Autonomous means that you're sovereign. It means that you want to be independent. You don't ask for demands. And so that was the idiocracy of it, you know. Then they changed to CHOP. Now, when they did that, now if you remember a few years back, there was protest was called what? Occupy Manhattan or Occupy Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who they got their ideological backing from, which was full. Back then, if you were watching it back then, they were being called out for having provocateurs, opportunistic people who were getting interviews that were, basically reading lines versus having a real organic interview. So that's again, you have this one of these entities that are concocting and orchestrating protests.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now, as it goes for Raz Simone, if you want a movie reference for Raz Simone, you go, or if you want to go to the old school movie, you're gonna look at the Isaac Hayes role in Escape from New York. More recently and more relevant, in my opinion, to this generation is the movie Surrogate with Bruce Willis. And look at the character that Ving Rhames plays, and look at the basically the film's version of what a Chaz slash Chop would be in a film. You had it right there, and that movie's from like 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. That's the whole role of uh Raz Simone. Now I have an article that has an interesting line, and I'm gonna read it to you. This is the Gateway Pundit written on the 6th of this year. Raz's public relation team has done a lot of work to portray Raz as a gangster. Oliver Darcy from CNN has helped him in shaping his image.
Hmm.
So, just because of what you think you seeing, It ain't. It might just be a script. It might just be a play. It might just be straight out of the movie Surrogate.
Red Day, that is crazy. That is something else. I see now that he's kind of taking a back seat towards everything that's going on. He's doing his public relations tour and getting everything primmed and proper now. But he was basically the front man on the scenes, and people saw him giving orders and
Right.
all that stuff. So I mean, it's just crazy to watch him play the back seat now, as all this stuff has came to an end. As
Well,
far
if we follow that movie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if we follow that movie line, that movie script, what happens in the movie with the Veen Rain character? So you had the people going against the so-called people, the resistance people were against having these surrogates or clones move in society for people. So they were the opposition group. The society had already been moving like that. So you stay in your house and your clone would do your work for you. They would go out in society for you. Well, the resistance group against that was actually in the end when Ving Rhames' character gets killed, turns out to be a clone controlled by the creator of the clones. So now let's apply that to Raz Simone.
mm-mm, mm-mm. Well, I got two quick more questions. I don't want to drag this out. We're gonna keep going
Sorry
on
about
this.
that. I got a phone call. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you good? You good? My bad. I didn't even
So
realize it. I was going to go on to the next two questions.
okay,
Uh,
okay.
what what's the real goal of these protests?
The real goal of these protests, in short, would be to create destabilization in our society. And the reason why I say that is because we'll have to have another show to explain it. But there's a actually playbook and a blueprint that these guys are following on these protests.
Okay.
So the ultimate goal is to destabilize society.
Oh,
And there's other you can say reactionary goals like to get the racial divide, which is very much happening, to get the police society divide, which is happening. And so you have all these other side issues, but that's the ultimate goals is to cause destabilization.
well, we have to do that video, especially in this series, because, like I said, it's a lot of heavy information. But I just want to put it out there so that we can say that we didn't tell you guys, what we're seeing. um, Other effect means of the protests.
Other effective means of the protest. Look, the way that we or society protests now doesn't yield results. And there are all kinds of ways, some of which I can't really share because, I don't want them people to think wrong of me because I'm not a threat. But some of these techniques may seem they're non-violent, but they may seem threatening to them. But one of them is like phone bombs and email bombs. If the society stayed their ass in the house and phone bombed the police department, the city hall, the courts, and you can phone bomb them and email bomb them. You will literally shut them down, literally, to make your voice be heard and say, look, if you guys do not change policy immediately of your police brutality or whatever, this is what's going down. The society has come together and we've made a stand, period.
Right.
And
Right.
that's one non-violent way of protest. It doesn't require you to go in the streets, doesn't require you to get infiltrated by all these other groups, doesn't require getting attacked and labeled and surveilled and possibly catching a felony for participating in a violent protest. Whether that might not even been your intention. You was out there, and because you was out there and they got them people in them windows and on them roofs and them cars that you ain't paying attention to, and they taking pictures.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's other ways to get it done versus those ways. Um, I know I've seen in the past where, and we saw it in this case, where they didn't announce it because social media wasn't there. They showed up at the police officer's house. And you saw that video in response to that lady being harassed by the police officer at the park. She happened to belong to some militia group. They showed up at the police officer's house.
Right.
So those are kind of, it can be the judge, it could be the mayor, it could be, but you can't be in protest form and having it's got to be grassroots where it's the citizens. It's not people catching the bus getting paid. And when y'all see them, y'all whoop their ass.
Get them out of
So
there.
they,
Get them
yeah,
out of
you got to get them out of there. That's man. See, the community has to be. Uh, they might have racial tension. They might have different cultures, ideologies. But one thing we, as a human community in America, have to change is y'all got to stand together on issues like this. You have to come together. Otherwise, you're going to have protests and protesters that catch buses and get paid and fuck up your neighborhood. Sorry for saying that word.
No,
Hope
you
you
good.
maybe you got to edit that out. But
Yeah.
yeah, but that's we have to use those other means. We have to put pressure on city councilmen. You have to put pressure on mayors. And I'm talking about effective pressure. I'm not talking about pressure like how these people show up at the house with the news and the guy has to come out with nah, that's not effective pressure. Effective pressure is when you show people that you have the ability to see them and not necessarily physically touch them, but psychologically touch them in their most vulnerable moments, when the
Right.
moment they don't expect it. And that's the kind of pressure that they would say, oh, okay, you mean business. And it has to be the citizens again.
Right.
It sounds a little, macho or crazy, but these kind of things work. Those things work.
I mean, I
Uh,
could see that being a effective solution versus us outside in the streets. And like you said, a lot of people have gotten killed in these protests. A lot of people have had uh very serious injuries in these protests. Um, and that's why we're talking about it. That's why we're discussing it and opening up some better solutions because we don't see anything moving at this point. What we see are things moving, um, but they're not moving fast enough. It's not effective. You know, where is that $1 billion that is coming from the NYPD really going? Do you think it's really going to go into our communities? Do you think that you know, screaming and yelling and being frustrated in the streets is going to make these people who live in these great communities really be bothered by you standing outside their homes, their nice mansions? Um, it's just a lot of things that we could be doing, and I want to see us doing moving forward. You know, it's a lot of things that are going on. I think the next thing we're going to discuss is the media's marketing of Black Death, and that's going to be a really good explanation into why we're seeing this uptick in Black Death on the media and why we're out here in the streets, you know, just we're irritated, we're pissed off. And that video is going to be coming up next, so please stay tuned. Cisco, do you have anything else you want to say?
Oh no.
Okay.
Y'all just tune into the next video, please.
Yeah. Please be careful, be safe out here. 4th of July is coming up. Um, be safe, be smart, and be on the lookout for anything strange. We'll be back with more.